She's just making copies of the agenda, but there's nothing really on the agenda to speak about. Ask for a resolution to approve the minutes of the last meeting. Ron, seconded by Fred. Any changes? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. And we'll shoot right down now to the only item that we have on the agenda for discussion, and that's worded is a discussion of the performance evaluation form for the county administrator. I guess I just kick off the meeting by doing a little review of where we've been. We started out this thing with varying levels of exposure to performance evaluation. We decided at the beginning not to include HR for the first few meetings. I think we should have. I'll take the responsibility for not doing that or suggesting that we do that. We floundered around quite a bit for a while, but I think we're getting to the point now where we're going to end up with a good product. You've all had the, or do you all have the documents that Gretchen mailed to you, emailed to you? Yeah?
Well, you
Got it on your... Okay.
yeah, you're in that.
I spent quite a bit of time going over it, and it looks good to me. Gretchen, you want to come up and sit at the table and review it with us?
Sure. When you asked me to put together a form, I really thought that you needed a system. And so one of the reasons why I put together the system instructions was because, you know, this committee is in place right now, but things change. People change here, and we've got the election cycles, which I mentioned in the system. So I thought it was important to have a guidebook that will be part of this process going forward. So that's why I put together the system. To support the system, there are 3 forms, Exhibit A, B, and C. The first, Exhibit A, is obviously the administrator's self-evaluation form. It is a narrative, and it really sets the stage. The administrator, obviously a very important position within the county, also helps to set the goals for the next performance period. This is a collaborative process with the Board of Supervisors. I recommended that there be an executive committee of the Board of Supervisors to work through that with the administrator. But Exhibit A is really narrative elements. There are 8 questions that are part of it. It should elicit sufficient information to be able to formulate the appropriate performance feedback, which is feedback from the performance period, what expectations were met, what expectations were not met, and reasons why, what happened in the course of the year, and also recommendations on the goals for the next performance period. Exhibit B is a recommended form if the Board of Supervisors decides that they want to include all 20 members of the Board of Supervisors in the evaluation process. And so there are several questions here that will elicit sufficient feedback for the executive committee to be able to provide the administrator with a comprehensive evaluation. Exhibit C is the evaluation form itself for the county administrator. This will actually be the conclusion of the entire process so that the executive committee can provide the county administrator with performance feedback on the performance period, which should be the last year. I have picked, in our prior discussions, I talked about competencies, and I've explained what competencies are in the system instruction. And so based on the goals that the current county administrator formulated and presented to the Board of Supervisors, I included those competencies or those categories that I thought those goals fell within. So that's why on page 1 of Exhibit C, you've got planning, finance, compliance, communications, both written and verbal, organization, judgment, decision-making, crisis response under judgment, project management, leadership, and continuing professional education. So those are the areas that I chose for the multi-factor performance competencies, just because they were reflected in the goals that the administrator put forth for this year. And then the rest of the document, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. It's populated. I categorized those goals into goal areas with opportunities to identify whether the administrator will exceed those expectations, meet those expectations, or does not meet those expectations, with opportunities for performance feedback. The next step of this process, if you liked this particular evaluation, would be for the administrator to go forth and actually continue the development of the goals that were presented, to put specific deliverables with due dates and timeframes on those. So those are the three forms.
Okay, any comments, suggestions? Okay, I guess I'll start it off then. I think this is well done. My only concern is we've got a form here that you said would be for all 20 supervisors. I don't think I've ever seen an evaluation done by a board of directors where everyone actually sits down and does the evaluation. I think it would be difficult to try to process all of the input that would come as a result of having everyone do a complete review. To me, it would seem to make a lot of sense if that form were for the executive committee, and that we invite all supervisors to submit a letter if they had any special concerns about the activity of the administrator. Thoughts? Jim?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the administration of the departments, that's one thing, you know, that's the administrator needs to be looked at in terms of how they do each department. Are they setting goals, meeting goals, how well are they running? But when it comes to the Board of Supervisors, I think that's like a separate issue, and I think the Board of Supervisors themselves should evaluate the administrator in terms of themselves. Is he meeting their needs and that sort of thing? So I think that's two separate things.
I guess my only comment would be that I don't know about the rest of the supervisors, but I know that there are departments here that I'm not really familiar with because I don't deal with them on a regular basis. So it'd be extremely hard for me to say, okay, I think our administrator does a great job in Department X or whatever it is. And I suspect if you were open and honest, other supervisors would have the same.
That's exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying that you have the executive committee would look at how the departments are run, or however you evaluate how the departments are run, and then you have it's two parts of the evaluation. The board wouldn't be sitting there looking at how the administrator, they would have input into the executive committee, but in terms of themselves, how does the administrator meet their needs would be a different kind of evaluation. So what I'm saying is along the lines of what you're saying.
Okay, I guess I don't interpret it the same way, but
If what you're saying, Supervisor Brock, is that department heads would have feedback, that would be more of a 360-degree evaluation, which is a totally different process, and that's...
No, I'm saying that this would apply to, there's two separate things. One is in government, there's the executive side and there's the legislative side. The executive side is how well are the departments administered, which this would apply to. The other side is the legislative side, which is you know, how are our needs as legislators being met? So I'm saying that would be where our input would be. You wouldn't go to an executive committee, you'd say to the board, are you, as a legislative body, are your needs being met? That's two separate things. I wouldn't be able to say, you know, unless I was the head of chairman of social services or something, I wouldn't know, you know, in detail how social services is being run if I'm on the board. So it would be hard for me to, like what Bud's saying, I wouldn't be able to say, oh, this is not, you know, give them a low mark for running, or a high mark for social services, but I would know in terms of what my needs as a legislator are. Am I getting information? Is it, you know, that kind of whatever goes into being as a legislative body. So it'd be two different things.
Well, I wonder if this document, Exhibit C, could be what is used by the executive committee, but then maybe a simpler page or two that the rest of the supervisors could use to provide input. With a big comment section. Obviously, Scott lots to say about it, I think.
How many forms do we need?
Well, I do think there's value in having the individual supervisors take part in this. I don't know if there's value in having them all take this much part in it.
Yeah, I guess that's what I was suggesting in the beginning, that you would invite all supervisors to submit a letter on how they feel the administrator has been performing. It can be a form, doesn't have to be a letter. The other thing that it's not going to be a requirement, I don't think. I don't think you can't require 20 supervisors to do an evaluation. So we might get 50% participation. You might get 10 supervisors that are doing it.
I think if you provide a form as opposed to having us generate our own document, you might get a little more participation.
Okay.
I don't know. I think if I'm reading what you said, that I agree with the idea that there should be more broader input base, at least in some areas, but not detailed. So.
No. All I've got to do is just separate the two, so that they're two. I mean, you manage the departments, right? But you also make sure that the board gets the information, the minutes, and all that sort of thing. Those are two separate things, in my opinion. I mean, I know if I'm getting information or not, and that gives me perhaps even leverage. I don't know, you know, whether I haven't had any trouble, but I'm just saying down the road that I want input on whether my needs as a legislator are being met. That's one thing. That's a separate evaluation almost. And then the other part, which is the administration of all the departments, would be along the lines with an executive committee that, you know, people that really know what you're doing. Does that make sense? I'm not really I'm not really breaking, or I'm not really saying I'm against this. I'm just saying there should be two. We should understand that the legislative part is different than the executive part.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I guess I have four distinct questions, but one of them relates directly to this piece of it with the review from the entire Board of Supervisors. And I agree with Ron that perhaps, and Jim, what's presented by HR might be too much to be asking our supervisors to fill out with 14 different questions. But we did review, and we did talk about a proposed form last meeting that just had 5, and, you know, was a form that, you know, for one said assists departments and programs in evaluating the quality of services, encourages open communications between elected officials and staff, responsible for supervision of department heads. I would think that that's a fairly easy question for our supervisors to fill out and put any comments, and then perhaps not make it mandatory, but understand that you would reflect on your, whatever group does this rating. We've asked all our supervisors to fill out this form. Of 20, 18 participated. Of the 18, here are the collective statistics and their ratings. and here are their comments. That would be incredibly useful for a committee making an evaluation for any department head to have, but particularly to our county administrator who reports to all 20 of us. So to me, it makes sense as a responsibility that I would have to the people whom elected me to fill out that form. And if I'm not going to take the time to do that and provide that feedback to my colleagues, then the people who elected me should be aware of that I'm not putting forward that effort. I think it should be transparent. I don't think it should be a group of 3 or 4 making that decision, and that they should have feedback from all supervisors who are voluntarily providing it, and that information should be made public.
I don't think there's any disagreement with the fact that we want all the supervisors to input. We're talking now about how they do it. Do we create another form? Do we have them send a letter in?
Well, what's wrong with the one that we did before? Everyone
You know,
followed that.
I've made this statement before. If I'm reviewing somebody and I want them to end up with a good review, form doesn't make any difference. I'll make the form match. I mean, it's...
Well, I'm confused, because you just said the form, that's some of the feedback here, that 14 might be too many for a board of supervisor, for each supervisor to answer, but we have one with 5.
I didn't say that, but...
No, but from what Ron and Jim, unless I misinterpreted, didn't you say perhaps this is too much to ask the board to complete?
It's certainly more than my feeble mind can handle.
Mine too.
And that's all I was saying is, you know, we do have a draft of one, that those elements are something that the board, going back on our minutes and our YouTube, this committee here said, these elements seem appropriate. Why not take a look at that as your Board of Supervisor review form and use that as a supplemental document on doing your evaluation that gets handed over to whatever performance review committee?
What's the rest of the committee's thoughts on that?
Oh, I'm good with it.
I don't have a problem with the executive committee going in, because those are the people that have worked with them every day, you know, much more so than all the supervisors. But I don't have a big problem with having another simple form for the rest of the supervisors to have input too, but I definitely would trust the executive committee to make the final evaluation.
Yeah.
But who is our executive committee now? We don't have an executive
Well,
committee.
yeah, I mean, it's right in this document, it's the chairman,
Well,
the chairman, the budget officer, chair of personnel, chair of finance, and chair
Well, I
of
don't know
support
who
services.
decided on that executive committee, because we haven't ever taken that to the full board.
We did
and
discuss it at the last
We
meeting here.
discussed it, but
Yeah.
we've never had a full board agree on an
I
executive
know, but
committee.
that's what we're supposed to be doing, is making recommendations to the full board, isn't it?
Well, our chairman, though, gave us the task of keeping this as simple as possible, and he also talked about perhaps the personnel committee would review it. But the executive committee is a new definition that we're just hearing for the first time. I know we've talked about that in essence, we have an executive committee, but we don't have a formal defined executive committee in
No, but
our
I think that's one of
bylaws.
the recommendations we should make, is the people that are on that list of who's the executive committee are the ones that do the day-to-day operations of the county. You know, finance knows whatever's going on in finance, and personnel knows about the personnel. Chairman's supposed to know about everything, working with the administrator.
But why not, most of those people are on personnel, and then you still at least would have a broader spectrum of the people, you know, you're excluding really, and then I think, Bud, you mentioned at the last meeting, that those are people that have been around a while, they have experience. But what's wrong with having other people on that performance evaluation committee? I mean, if that's what it is, then make a performance, if the only reason you're gonna use executive committee, quote, is for this, why not
Mhm.
call it a performance management committee? And have, or use your personnel committee, which addresses personnel.
In effect, even though we don't call it the executive committee, that this is the group of people that, you know, that guide the administrator day to day.
In practice,
Budget officer.
actual
personnel
practice,
planning.
that's what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, that's the informal structure of how,
And then,
that group has more influence over how the administrator administrates the county
But
than the rest of us.
But that's also more of an executive thing, that's telling the administrator, you need to do this or do that or whatever with respect to the departments. But when it comes to the legislative part, you know, when we're getting information on policies or laws or whatever, that's a whole different thing, and there are people, you don't want, I mean, one of the things we need to do is create a consensus on what we consider important. I mean, this whole thing with the nursing home, some of the things was because people were getting information later and then coming back and saying we need to, if a lot of the disagreement, I think, could have been resolved if everybody had the information at the beginning. You know, so if there was a certain level of research done, I don't wanna go over the nursing home, but just to take it as an example, if everybody had the same information as a legislature, then you'd have a standard of, okay, on this issue, this is how much information we're gonna get. You know, and that would, cause it's a different thing. One is social services is running their departments. The legislature is different. They're making big decisions. That's, you're mixing two things together, in my opinion.
Frank?
I think exhibit B is fine. I think it gives you the leeway and the latitude to cover both administrative and legislative, or whatever your complaint is, or whatever your recommendation is. I think that's
I agree with you. I think you can respond to concerns for both legislative and executive. I don't see any reason why they can't be answered on this one forum, but.
Well, technically they can, yes.
So
I think actually they will.
would you recommend that all the supervisors have the opportunity to complete a copy of Exhibit C
Well,
in that case, or
I don't see any reason to do that, but, I certainly want individual supervisor input. But when you start looking at this kind of detail, I don't think every supervisor is gonna have the kind of knowledge to respond to all of these different areas.
Well, that's why I suggested something simpler, and we have something simpler. I don't know.
You want something reasonably simple? I don't know how many, what's there, a dozen items on this sheet?
I'm talking about the one that Rachel made up.
14.
I only count 11. I got 11 here in total. 11 items versus,
There's
I was
14
looking at
on
B.
exhibit C. I think that was one for the full.
oh, okay, all right.
I don't think that 14 is too big a burden for the entire board. On input from the full board.
You can only count them.
Okay, let me, go back to you guys again. We're looking at Exhibit B now. And, what Fred is saying is that he doesn't think that is too much of a burden for individual supervisors to respond to. Is everyone in agreement? I must be going hard of hearing. It's a good thing I'm gonna get off this board next year. 'Cause I can't hear you.
Supervisor,
Yes.
Taylor, I put the system together and I made the recommendations of the forms. I actually created the forms and made the recommendation based on some of the inputs that I had received. I think that it is important to keep in mind that when you're evaluating performance, setting clear expectations of performance is vital. By offering the entire Board of Supervisors the opportunity to provide feedback in an unstructured form to whoever will be constructing the evaluation, whether you deem that an executive committee is not necessary. It would be an unwieldy process to try to condense that information down into performance feedback that would be constructive for the administrator to execute their duties and responsibilities. In managing performance, you are supposed to set expectations. And one of the words that Supervisor Seaver had identified is statistically. And so it's very hard to quantify performance unless you have a system. So I'm hearing some incongruencies in the conversation, but ultimately ultimately, what I'm thinking about is that, Paul Dusick is an experienced administrator. He's been here for some time at Warren County, but he won't be here forever. And you will have a new administrator at some point in the future. And it will be very important. And I tried to actually define that in the package, because you will have a new administrator, and you will have to set performance expectations for that supervisor, for that county administrator. The supervisors will have to come together and define exactly what the administrator will need to be focusing their energies on. When I did a presentation 2 meetings ago, I talked about that an organization really has to be driven by a vision and a mission and overall goals. And we don't necessarily have that at this point. We're striving toward that, and I actually think the administrator has provided a pathway for the Board of Supervisors to focus some of their energies and get some of the results that they want. And so I'm uncomfortable with having a system that is so loosely defined. Again, our current administrator is very experienced in this role. If we are going to try to go outside of the organization at some point in the future and going to try to recruit an administrator into this organization, we will have to be able to clearly define what we're looking for, how we're going to measure that individual's performance, and we need a system to do that. Because a new person coming into the organization will have it. If it's loosely defined, if the expectations are not clear, how can that person be successful? I would be concerned if it wasn't more specific. Goals have to be measurable.
Fred?
This exhibit B, if you use this for the full board, there's only 9 multiple choice questions with only 3 questions, and then 5 open-ended ones. It doesn't seem to me it's a huge burden. I think it's something I can do in about 20 minutes. So if the consensus is we want to have input from the full board, I don't know what's wrong with this form. And it fits into the whole system that's been designed.
You're a lawyer. I'm kidding.
Okay, let's get one chunk of the elephant at a time then. Does everyone on the committee agree with what Fred has said?
I'm gonna speak, but I only speak of confusion, because like I said, this is foreign to me. And I see 20 supervisors, I see people leave this board, come on this board, and from all different walks of life. And where I'm sitting right now, in my involvement and what I try to execute and provide for the taxpayers that elect me, is to come up here and do the best I can on the committees I put on and move forward, et cetera, and to deal with people like Paul, et cetera. And, I'm limited in my capacity, whether it be intellect, understanding, exposure, to all the things that come before me, but I try to absorb as much as I can and make the best decisions I can. I'm not an engineer, I'm not an attorney, I'm not a doctor, but I look at things, in generalities, and I depend on people with, like, Paul's experience. He was the attorney for the town of Queensbury. He came up here, he's the attorney for the town, the county. He put in and got this administrator job. His exposure to events that go on in government far exceed anything that I will ever in a lifetime or be involved with. And he's judged every day, every month that we meet on what gets done and how we proceed. If he makes a mistake, we get sued, or we have an injury, or we have all kinds of financial difficulties if he doesn't do his job, and that raises red flags. And this is very transparent. He gets asked questions every day. He handles and puts out fires, as they say. So I guess my point is, you're having in the vernacular that I would understand, you're having a high school JV coach critique the New England Patriots on their Super Bowl. It really, that's what it seems to me. And I think it's terribly unfair, because, sometimes I have to go in and go 4 steps back so Paul can get me on the stage that I belong, so then I can ask intelligent questions. Because, you know, where he's been and where my lack of understanding, he first has to educate me. Then when he gets me there, then he explains the yin and the yang of it. And if we do this, could happen. If we don't do this, this could. So I see a tremendous difficulty with the people, the 20 of us, that are evaluating the guy. And you can put all this stuff in front of me. Now, interesting, I'm trying to go through here and get a point of order here. Evaluation objectives. Now, Gretchen did these. I have other objectives besides this, and I only see one that really, I think, got us to the table, and that was so we can provide unbiased performance information and documentation, support compensation decisions, which I mean are, I guess, are pay raises. And this is kind of paradoxical because I didn't vote for his pay raise, but I believe he deserved it. And it's more political because I just basically felt he did such a good job negotiating with the unions, who really came around, and you were so successful with him. It was not time for him to take a raise because it looks like he's getting on the back end. You can't sit in meetings with the unions and say, I'm not getting a raise, and then get it after the fact. I just didn't think it followed the way it should. But I didn't think he didn't deserve it, and that's what I told him. So those issues become a lot more complex than just that one thing we have there as far as compensation, whether or not he deserves it. I felt he deserved it, but I didn't vote for it. I don't know who's wrong here or who's the hypocrite, possibly myself. But and then generally, with all the things I'm involved with, whether it be the airport, whether it be the courts, or Cornell Cooperative, or the WIC, all that, you know, those are things that I have to understand first before we move forward, and Paul has to understand them all. And I can't imagine of all the other things that he gets involved with you, with economic development, etc. He has to be all things to all people. And he is exposed. He is so exposed because the media is at every meeting. You know, the meetings that I attend, if I don't know what's going on in the background, I could think he looks bad or doesn't have the right answers. Then when you do your research, you find out that. So I think he's evaluated consistently through these committee meetings, and so I'm having trouble with where you can kind of put it down to 5 questions. I mean, to me, if you want to do evaluations, this is the Dan Gerard evaluation. Once a year, Paul will be in this room. If you want to come in, you got questions about how you think he could do his job better, because that's really what we want here, right? We want Paul to do his job at the optimum performance he can. And I don't know if this is really sending the signal to him to say, hey, Paul, go get him. I really don't know where it's enhancing his. It says here, you know, that he's going to, he's inspire achievement. I just don't see this inspiring achievement out of you. So I see some negatives of what we're doing, and I would prefer sitting down with you and saying, here, this, and this, you know, what do we got to do to move this forward faster, or what are we doing wrong, or what could we, because he's the guy that will research it, he's the guy that will make the phone calls to the people, and he will report back to you, and those are my concerns with how I do my job. I don't know if that makes any sense, but this is very difficult for me to understand what the end game here is, because I really believe it's the JV coach trying to critique the Patriots.
No, I agree with an awful lot of what you said, except for one thing you said. I think you're selling yourself short, because I put a lot of confidence and respect in what your opinion is. The bottom line is, though, somebody's got to come up with a method to evaluate the administrator, and that's us. I don't know.
And I'm in agreement of this, because this is just new to me. When you ask me for the input, I don't think I'm adding a whole lot. I think I'm detracting from this process, and I don't want to be that way. But I want to at least give my opinion. I don't know where it all falls out, but I don't think I'm blending too much of this committee.
Okay. I don't agree with you, but Ron?
Well, I think you provided, to me at least, a perfect example of individual supervisory input that could be beneficial. And you're telling us about how good Paul is at communication and willing to take the time and go back a few steps and explain and move forward with you. And I think that kind of personal, experiential testimony, if you will, about that aspect of Paul's job could be valuable to the executive committee in making their final determination. I'm not looking at this as, I want to be able to write down that Paul took my parking space last week, or something like that, you know. Yeah, but everybody takes it. You're welcome to next time.
I don't take it, Ron, just so you know. Careful.
Not anymore. Not after last time. So, I do think there is room, and I don't know that it needs to be mandatory, but definitely supervisors should, as you said, feel welcome to participate in this. And if you have something in writing, one way or the other, it's probably not all going to be as glowing as what Dan said in every respect, but I think that kind of thing could be valuable to the final determination.
I agree.
So I think Dan, you just went a lot to this, and from a perspective that I hadn't looked at previously. So, thinking outside the box, perhaps really what brought us all here together was obviously the issues over raises and performance. And as Frank mentioned, you know, a lot of people come up to, they're asking for raises, we don't have a lot of documentation. I heard this morning at the department head meeting that, you know, performance plans are being done in some departments and not others. We don't really have a consistency across our county and our departments whether a performance plan gets done or not. So maybe what we are doing is completely overthinking it. The chairman, and I'm disappointed he's not here, I thought he was gonna be here today, but really asked us to keep it simple. And maybe from what Dan said, a recommendation from our committee could be that annual or a semi-annual and an annual meeting in executive session to discuss one person's performance, where we sit down and if we have questions or concerns, just like in so many other, I'm trying to think of an example, but you know, you write your question, I'm thinking of debates, but it's not the right thing. You know, you write your questions down, you give them to the chairman, and he reads off the questions. Gives some confidentiality, some anonymity, but yet you're still able to get questions or concerns or comments answered in maybe a 2-hour executive session of let's talk. And, you know, I understand what Gretchen's saying about going forward and having, you know, who's going to be, if we go out and we hire somebody else. But honestly, Paul did just fine without this in place. I think we can all agree with that, right? We haven't had this in place ever. So he's come on and, I mean, you listen to Dan's account and, you know, there's a glowing recommendation. Of course opinions will differ, but maybe it's, and who's to say we go out and we hire another administrator? I think we need to focus on what we have right now, also looking at the bigger picture, and maybe slowly moving into this process. But if we're not gonna do a performance work plan for our top county official, I think we need to be clear throughout the county. I think it sends mixed messages. And so if we're doing it in some departments and not all, I think we need as a board, you know, to talk about, are we expecting performance work plans throughout our county or not? And maybe it's more of an informal setting, like you suggested, once or twice a year.
I understand Gretchen's, what she's saying, but going back to my point is, generally that's in a business structure. Like if you're at C.R. Bard, you might have worked your way up and then you're up for plant manager. You have this history, so you're being judged by the best person to put in. You know, but I don't think that happens here with what the people that are coming forward to, like, there's been several administrators, and I realized, when I read it in the paper, that's how I read it, that he was gonna be our administrator. I was ecstatic about it, because he was such a good attorney, so, and the history that he had, and what he brought to the table, as opposed to, not name drop, but Hale Payne came over from a different level, and there was troubles there, and, so, I can see when you guys come on, new people come and look and they want this and expect that because they answer back to the taxpayers. So I can see the rub, but there's also difficulties with him being all things to all people, and that. So I understand this and how it works in business, but here I'm having trouble.
Well, Supervisor Gerard, the other thing is that you know, when the personnel committee interviewed me for the position that I was chosen for, one of the messages that I got from that personnel committee was that the county needed to run more like a business. And one of the discussions when I presented the performance management process, when I also talked about the strategic planning process with vision, mission, goals, those kinds of things, that sets the tone for direction of the organization. And one of the important key points that is missing at Warren County is that we don't have succession plans in place. And so I designed these forms as a result of this committee and what I was asked to do. As far as succession planning goes, setting expectations of performance and having accurate job descriptions, we don't have a job description for the administrator at this point. But if we go out and recruit for an administrator, because I don't think there's anybody internally that can step into this spot, we have to know exactly what we're looking for when we go out and recruit for it. We have to be able to tell the candidates who would apply for that position exactly what the county is, what it wants to be in the future, and what you will be expecting that person to do. That person will be accepting a very large role, and I tried to make that point in the narrative of the system. You know, the next person who is the county administrator here will have very, very large shoes to fill. In the Exhibit C, when it talked about the multi-factor performance competencies, those are some of the things that you're going to be looking for in candidates that you're going to be interviewing. And the Board of Supervisors, or a subcommittee of the Board of Supervisors, will be looking for the next county administrator, and they're going to be looking for some of these qualities. If you haven't articulated them, you're going to have to come up with a strategy, or you may be making a bad hiring decision at some point in the future. So, you know, I've heard everything that you've said, and, you know, I think that we have a very experienced administrator who knows all facets of the job, created many of the facets of the job. But each one of the elements of the performance competencies, for example, will change weight based on the financial position of the county, based on what the goals are at the time. You know, I certainly think that in the environment that we're working in right now, the fiscal part of this job will always remain at the top stratification, you know, just because money's so tight. But other things will fall into play. You have to be able to articulate those someplace within the system so that you're going to be ready for the next step.
Jim?
Yeah, what Dan said was basically what I was saying before. When you're looking at the administrator and saying, should he get a raise or not, you're looking at almost two different things. One is, did he do a good job? And then the other side is the political side, is whether he should get a raise or not. And that's why I'm saying you need to separate the two. You need to say, look at specific things that are performance related, you know, do people show up to work, do they hit certain levels and all that kind of stuff, and then you have to separate from that the political side, which is the legislature. And if you mix the two together, you're going to have the exact problem Dan was talking about. You can't, we're not a business. And, I mean, businesses don't have the power to tax, they don't have voters putting them in office. And if you don't separate those two, you're going to end up you're going to be mixing performance and politics together, and it won't work. That's why I think you need to separate the two and realize where politics centers and where simple performance centers. I mean, people show up to work, that's not politics. And whether you get them to come to work and do their job is administrative, and that should be separate from, does Paul deserve a raise or not? Or, I mean, I told you, I thought you did a good job. But whether he gets a raise or not is a whole different animal, because we're a political animal ourselves. So you need to separate those two and judge them in two different categories. Otherwise, you're going to have debates till the cows come home.
All right.
Yeah, I hear what Dan's saying, and, you know, I agree with just about everything Dan is saying. But I also hear what Gretchen's saying, and I agree with what she's saying. And I think that with those two elements, I think this is the perfect opportunity for the county at this point, because we've never really done this before. And we do have an experienced administrator that has a lot of experience at the county here. And this is the perfect opportunity to get this in place so that it will benefit us in the future. And, you know, maybe not necessarily make it about Paul, you know, it's about that position. You know, obviously, he would be the one evaluated right now, because he's the one there, but it's not about Paul. It's about how we approach this and who we end up, you know, as the next administrator, or whoever's here, to make that clear.
But Paul could get all his numbers, and we could still say he doesn't deserve a raise.
Right, but that's a separate political question outside of the
That's
evaluation.
what I'm saying, you gotta,
But you don't have, I don't see where you have to make that part of the evaluation. You can evaluate him,
Yeah, that's
come
what
to
I'm
the
saying.
conclusion he does a great job, and
Yep.
still you might wanna not vote for the raise for other political considerations, but you don't need to make that part of the
That's
evaluation.
exactly what I'm saying, we need to separate the
Right.
two, I'm agreeing with you.
Okay, but, and, you know, as I look at this, I really think we're overthinking it. I
We
mean,
are,
you
there's no
know,
doubt about it.
I wouldn't have any problem filling out these 14, questions, and I'm happy with this Exhibit C. I think it does make sense for an executive committee, the people that are working with Paul, managing the county day to day, to do the final evaluation. But if the rest of the committee feels it should be the personnel committee, I don't have a big problem with that either. I think it's a great job, and I'm happy with it.
I gotta tell you, I think you're right. I think we are overthinking it. And if we were to pick this thing up and put it in place as is, not the end of the world. You know, if we find there's something we wanna change, we can come back and change it. We're not tied to this for the rest of our lives. The other point I'd like to make, the input from the individual supervisors, Dan just demonstrated. You know, he spoke with passion. We got more out of what Dan said than we'd ever get if he filled a form out.
And I can't, that's where I'd have trouble communicating with it. This would not do, you're right.
But you can write a letter to the chairman and say, hey, this is what I think of our administrator. And say exactly the things that you just said.
But if you do that, well, it takes away, I mean, is Dan gonna then be able to say to the full board what he thinks? I mean, when
Well,
we vote.
in what we're doing here, I'm looking for the Dan Gerard, there's things that I would like, have set up so that I can talk to him, that I think will make it better between himself and other department heads. I get some of the chafe sometimes, and you know, he's gotta be the bad guy, he has to do his job, and then they, you know, bitch to me, and so, is some justified or not? I would like to have a forum where I say, is this okay? Are you okay with what's being said, and is this the way maybe you're pushing the guy so that things get done that way? I don't, you know, if we had evaluation, that doesn't come out in here, the things that I wanna know. If I sit down with him, I can say, and then I like when Ron has a problem somewhere, and then this initiated this, that, and the other thing, and there was stuff going on, and the only way I would know is to come in a meeting, listen to Ron, talk to him, say, I didn't like the way this was handled. Then I get informed. I'm not gonna go over all these, if you fill them out, pass them on, and then this is the, if I could come in and sit in, and Rachel saying, why do we do it this way? This is archaic, which a lot of the things we do. Why can't we do it this way? Which is happening when you get new blood in here. That makes sense to me. That's where I learn, and it gets better. And so that's the forum. I'm just saying the forum, for me, works that way. I don't lend much to the written evaluation.
What I'm saying is, you don't wanna have to write something out and send it to the executive committee. You wanna be able to say it in a committee meeting yourself, or say it to the full board.
Well, why can't you do both? I mean, why couldn't you have a meeting like you're suggesting, you know, sometime or after the budget is done, have an open session where you can discuss things with the county administrator, and then everybody fills out their form based on the answers you get at that meeting, and then have either the executive committee or the personnel committee decide.
Similar to not exit interviews, but where you would have these done, you know, and then you would come and say, we got this was brought up, but that could be anonymous of the supervisor, this came up, and what's your answer to this, or why is this going on, or how could you improve it? And then I could listen and get the whole scope of, so I'm just trying to say, I have a narrow piece of pie that I'm involved with, that I expect him to perform under. He does fine with what I'm involved with, if there's other places that, you know, I'd like to hear them too.
Right.
And I think he does a lot of good things to help us get through the jigs and the reels, as they say.
Well, and what I'm also hearing though is that you keep bringing up send a letter, but what I heard from Gretchen is she is concerned, as it relates to my comment, but it also relates to your letter, in an unstructured form, you know, trying to make that some type of a rating on a performance plan, which is I'm gathering what the issues are with the initial forms that were done. So I don't think a letter would work given that uneasiness, correct?
It's not quite, if you're not measuring against criteria or specific behavioral,
Well,
So-
you wanna have goals.
Okay.
We set goals, then we measure the county administrator's performance based on his performance of those goals, so then you don't want it open-ended.
So
I have a meeting in Albany I have to leave for, by 11:30, so I'm
Well-
happy with this.
You're happy with this? Would you put that in the form of a motion so we
Yes,
can
I
bring
will.
it? All right. Is there a second? Fails. I don't know where to go.
I don't know where to go from here then.
Well, I think
I think
part,
it's a great
Could-
process that's been created,
Yeah.
and it establishes goals, it evaluates them on how the goals are, being performed, everybody has an input, and then you have some committee that makes final decisions on the goals. Makes perfect sense to me, so.
Could we take this and have a meeting, go to personnel? There's some different people there, and have them give them the document, have them review it, and then get their input. Will that be helpful, or is that just convolute it all the more?
Well, it's the charge that's been given to this group. We can go to personnel. I mean,
Well, I mean,
a lot of us are on
it looks like
personnel.
we've stalemate, we've,
Yeah.
well, I think part of this too is, you know, we saw this on Sunday. I know for some of us here today, reading the entire thing today is the first time we're having to really evaluate it. I think it's too soon. You know, at our last meeting, we asked for as much notice as possible to really evaluate this, call our colleagues, talk to them about it. I, for one, have not had that time since Sunday. But I also like the idea of maybe changing things up a little bit of saying, well, we'll have this evaluation form, take out some open-ended questions, but we would give an opportunity to the entire board in an executive session to have what Dan's suggesting and have some confidential questions be asked. Hear whoever our county administrator is, hear those responses, and then subsequently fill out an evaluation form that could be quantifiable. And I just don't think
What
we're
you're
there
saying,
yet.
what you're saying is you don't have a problem with this, but you'd like to have this meeting where we discuss the administrator prior to filling out this form.
Well, I think there's a couple more steps that have to be taken and documented.
Is that the step though? What, I guess
Well, I think there's a couple steps. One, I feel strongly about the personnel committee, versus an executive committee. But two, incorporating a meeting like Dan has suggested, before filling out an evaluation, like a year-end evaluation, and, being able to have that dialogue with our county administrator, whomever that might be, with your colleagues all there, I think is really important, to kind of get a flavor of what's going on, so that you can be properly informed in filling out an evaluation form, which wouldn't be mandatory, but would be helpful to the personnel committee or whatever committee does that final evaluation at the end of the year.
Jane, you've been quiet.
No, I just thought, I think this is great, I think there's a lot of good stuff back and forth, I don't agree with all, and I don't disagree with all. But one thing I just wanna make in the whole personal tenure person here, it's gonna be tough if Paul leaves, eventually, I'm not saying he's leaving tomorrow, but because the experience of what he's got, he learned, he worked for many, many years as an attorney, sitting at almost every subcommittee meeting, learning all the aspects of all the jobs. And it's gonna be tough for a man or a woman to come in here and be our administrator if she or he has never been to any of our board meetings. Because this is not like a company like General Electric where you're producing a product, your CEO knows what's going on, and if the company doesn't make money, you worry about the board and the CEO. Here we don't make it. We just make rules and gotta inform and take care of the taxpayers. So, this is a very important position. And you know, with all my, you know, I'm like Dan, I'm not a high college grad, I'm not an engineer or anything else, but you know, you learn by doing your job. And the same thing is being the supervisor of town. You know, you take the bad with the good. You don't do a lot of things that people don't like, they go, well, I'm not gonna vote for you next time. You know, I don't worry about that. We can't worry all the time about, but this year, if you had to fill out this form today with just, you know, if I don't like one thing that Paul has done, say, for tourism, I'm gonna give him a bad rating. And if Frank gives him a bad rating on this, and you know, the wind up, he'll get 20 bad ratings out of 20 people, but it doesn't mean he's doing a bad job. He's you know, 20 bad things for 20 different people. So these forms, I would rather have, like, man, let's sit, this is good. You know, I'm listening, everybody has, you know, a semi-opinion, but, you know, that's tough. I always get myself in trouble because I got a big mouth. But you get a lot of turnover, and you get new people that come in, you know, it's tough to understand what's going on. It takes years sometimes. And, like I say, I'd be very depressed if Paul had to leave or took another job someplace and he wanted to resign, or when it comes to retire, it's gonna be tough. Because unless you have backup, Joan's saving now, or, you know, she's got backup, so if she decides to leave, boom, backup fills in and follows what she taught that person to do, and as long as everything was working right, the board supported her. And that's the same thing with an administrator, or, you know, you gotta have backup. And it's tough to evaluate. I mean, like I say, I can't say Paul did everything that I liked in 10 years, but I wouldn't give him a bad rating. I'd give him an excellent job overall. That's what we're missing the point.
I think we need a system where the board of supervisors establishes the goals, discusses them with Paul, and then evaluates him on how he performs those goals. And I don't see how you do that on an open-ended evaluation. And I think this does it. So if the rest of the committee doesn't agree, I would look forward to them coming back with some other system that does that. But I haven't seen anything else that's as good as this so far.
And I agree with you, Fred, but I disagree in the fact that we should just wash our hands and say, you know, come back with something else.
Yeah.
We got a human resources department that
Right.
we built to take care of this kind of stuff,
Right.
and we're not using it. It just blows my mind.
Is it possible to just concentrate on how Paul runs the departments and not look at the whole thing, just work on measurements of the departments and how well he runs that, and then build it up later, you know?
I think you have to have goals for the county. Running the department is only one part of it. How are we achieving the goals that the
Well,
board
yeah,
of
that's how-
supervisors and the chairman have set for the coming
Well,
year?
that is part of, you can't measure something unless you have goals. But it would be related just strictly to the departments and not whether it gets paid or, you know, put the pay thing aside and just concentrate on what you agree on.
Right.
Well, I'm just pretty much gonna say what I said before. I think we did create an HR department, and we established that, and I think Gretchen has done an excellent job here. But I think to me, this is more setting up the structure for the future. Because you're gonna, whether it's me or any of us sitting here, somebody's gonna sit here one of these days and have to come up with the criteria to hire the next administrator. And you're gonna have to know where you wanna go and what the county's about and how you wanna do it. And I think this is a big step in getting us to that point.
Yeah.
And I know we're concentrating on getting Paul's performance evaluation in place, but it seems to me where we're at with this, and, you know, like I said, I would have seconded Fred, certainly, but I want to see what you guys think to move forward. It seems to me the problem is we haven't had a HR department, we have Gretchen, and before we get to Paul, we need to evaluate the evaluator, because she's putting this before us, and she has a business background, and it doesn't seem, for my aspects of it, it doesn't seem to gel the way I think it will here. I understand moving forward, but Rachel has said, you know, we want to keep it simple. Why are we, and I hear Gretchen say it needs to be more detailed. It's a big job. And I see both points of view, but we're not getting the common ground on how we want to go about evaluating. Then we can get to Paul. That's the way I'm seeing it. We're at loggerheads with what our HR department's saying and what the supervisors are expecting out of this. Like not going over what, but Rachel has certain expectations. Fred sees this as better than anything we've ever had. I agree with that. And Ron, what can we do to get this where it needs to go? That's why I was saying if the personnel department be more supervisors looking at it going, I don't like this. Well, Paul didn't do it. Gretchen did. So she needs more direction from us to come back, because I think that's what Rachel's been saying is I thought we just wanted to keep it simple. And is that am I speaking out of turn, or I mean?
No, you're not, and what I wanted to talk about was organizational energy. I mean, with all of the subcommittee meetings that you've had up until this point, and you know, all of the hours that have been put into the forms, whether by Supervisor Seaver or myself, we've invested a lot of organizational energy in an evaluation system for one person. And is this really what we started out to do? Initially, my understanding was the reason this committee was put together was as a result of Paul's compensation increase during the budget process. And so here we are into the middle of February, where we've expended a tremendous amount of energy that we could have spent in other places on, and we've come to a place where I'm hearing that most parties are unhappy with where we are. So, you know, in taking this process forward or taking these forms to the Personnel Committee, I don't know whether that's a good use of all of our time. And, you know, frankly, Supervisor Seaver, I just have to tell you that, you know, you didn't get the forms till Sunday. I'm partly offended by that, and I have to tell you, I spent 11 hours this weekend putting this package together for you, because I can't do it during the week, because I don't have enough staff. And last year during the budget process, the Board of Supervisors was split on whether I could have additional staff for my department. I don't have enough staff to do the jobs. And whether it's performance management plans for the county administrator or performance plans for all the department heads or for the rest of the organization, there's only so many resources to go around. So the organizational energy that we spend on this, if this is a priority item, then we'll channel resources toward. But if it's not a priority item, then I need to spend my resources in another direction. So I have to get some feedback.
I'd like to respond.
Can I go
Can I
with
respond?
I think it's the,
You know, in this thing here, right, this HR did, maybe we should just send it down to supervisor and let them fill it out. And then come back and evaluate what they say. Leave it right there from that point. That's a starting point. And then we'll be able to see if these things will work in the way that we're hoping they work. Because, you know, I think every supervisor can answer these questions because they're multiple choice, pick one. And I think we'd find out in a month, something like this would work.
Okay, Rachel?
Yeah, I would definitely like to respond, and I think that it's important to understand it didn't come as a result of just the compensation. It came as a result of collectively a board saying, we need to start looking at people's performance as well as their longevity, and an issue that came across during the budget season. So I think that it was twofold in why we all came to this table. But I also think that it is different than business. You have a board of supervisors elected by the people to make determinations on how they see the county should be directed. And I think we came to this table, we came up with some objectives, and what didn't happen is those objectives that we came up with collaboratively didn't appear in a form. Instead, we were looking at much simpler forms from other counties, but we weren't looking at the elements that we all agreed on. So I think what Dan said when he said this is something you've done, that it's correct. It's not something that the committee has done, the supervisors have done, because that was done previously and discarded of. Furthermore, it is our prerogative as a board in terms of looking at staffing needs and making those decisions. Frankly, Gretchen, I rely on our county administrator to sit with you and say maybe the best use of your time isn't 5 hours in a board meeting, but rather knowing that you have an important meeting that our committee, our board, our chairman has said is a priority of this county would have been to be working on this. Last time we were here and we discussed it, you said we would have plenty of notice. You also said it would be in a form that's a draft Warren County, which it is, but we did not have plenty of notice. So maybe it's more about time management and maybe not sitting on so many different boards or being out of the office or whatever the case might be, and putting more time into the priorities that are set by this board, which may in fact differ from your priorities, but that is how a board works. So when I come to this table, and we've all been asked to sit on this committee, I would certainly hope that if we're taking our time, and I commend you on 11 hours, as you can tell, my forms took me well over 11 hours as well, and I don't have a staff working with me to do them either, but that is a responsibility I took when I ran for office and agreed to be on committees defined by our chairman. Our chairman set the goal of this committee, and it really was to come up with a simple form to evaluate the performance of our county administrator. And you started this conversation by saying that you were asked to do a form, and you felt that we needed more than a form, we needed a system. And so now we have a system in front of us instead of what we were charged to do, which was a form. So if you spent 11 hours doing a system when all we asked for was a form, I think that is something that the county administrator needs to spend time discussing time management and priorities, because in my opinion, it isn't sitting in that boardroom for 5 hours, it's working on priorities from the board.
Is there any constructive comments from this committee?
Sorry for that constructive fun.
Well, I don't see it as furthering our cause here. You know, the chairman gave us a responsibility, and it was brought about as a result of the discussion on an increase that we gave Paul. There's no question about it. He gave us a responsibility to come up with an evaluation system for the administrator. He wanted it done by the end of February. We've wasted so much time, you know, arguing about the form and the content. I just don't understand it. You know, we've got an HR department. I said this before. Why don't we listen? We've got an administrator. We don't listen to the administrator half of the time. Yes. Want to listen to you.
Well, no, I'll tell you, I got to be very honest with you. You know me. A lot of times I have a lot to say during committee meetings, and I sat back today and really genuinely listened, and I found it helpful, quite frankly. A couple observations. One is that, quite honestly, I don't think we're wasting time. This is your highest level position in the county. I think that that it's important that these conversations occur, because you know there will come a time when you do have to replace me. I mean, you're going to be hiring another county administrator at some point. So I think these are very, very healthy conversations, and none of us are wasting time by doing this, and none of us have wasted any effort, really. When I look at this, and I realize that, you know, we can get a little testy and some remarks can get said. The bottom line is, though, I think the conversation has been healthy. And what I'm taking away out of this is that, you know, a couple things. One is we do have an HR department. The HR department should be the one going back to and regrinding out something new. What I'm hearing is I think there was some good seen in what was generated, but I also heard that in terms of, interestingly, processes, that I think there's some value here I'm hearing in terms of maybe having this executive session where we could have a frank conversation with the county administrator, which I can tell you personally I've seen on occasions where those type of executive sessions can be very good. So it seems to me, just as a suggestion, Mr. Chairman, you know, listening to everything, is that I think there's been a lot of good ideas thrown out here, and I don't think I would give up. I think that, you know, my recommendation would be to see if the HR director could, taking in all of this stuff, and certainly I could sit down with her too and give her my thoughts, but try to blend everything we're hearing here. What I'm hearing is the value of an executive session. I'm hearing try to make the forms simpler, and you know, and I think that I'm hearing that there is an interest, like I say, in this concept that has been generated, and see if we can't go back and redo them and come up with another idea. And I know it's taken time, but I got to tell you, this is I think it's going to be something important. And once you get it down, it'll be, you know, a great thing for the system. And you know, I heard Supervisor Brock's remarks, and you know, we can certainly weigh in on, you know, try to balance that in all of this as well. That's just my thoughts. So I guess I'm not ready to give up. I think that this was a very healthy conversation. I learned a lot today, and perhaps we could go back to, you know, and try to just rework these and try to meet what the objectives were that we heard today. Does that make any sense, or?
Okay, and I kind of thought that that's where we were, is trying to move forward in what we've got today. We had a resolution come forward, it failed because it didn't get a second. So I guess I'm looking to you guys to tell me what direction you wanna go.
I would like to see where we were back a few meetings ago, where we had 5 specific things, not as detailed. I know that goes against Gretchen and her professionalism, and that's why, once again, the JV coach is saying something to someone that knows their job. And, you know, so I feel, but I mean, to get to an end, to justify the means here, that I think we have to go there. And to be honest, this has been very healthy for me. I mean, as much as I was wondering why they put me on it, but in the end result, we haven't evaluated you, Paul, we've evaluated Gretchen. Because she's new and I don't know Gretchen, and I don't know, once again, I don't know that type of job. I haven't had that exposure. So once again, she has a guy like me evaluating her and telling her what to do, and she has to navigate through it, and it must be extremely frustrating. I have some people that I really respect in my life and think that they're the hardest working, most successful people I've ever run into. Their work ethic is uncompared. If you bring them up here and plug them in, they won't fit. They'll last 2 weeks before they leave. And I hope that isn't you, because I think that's what you're up against. You're a professional that comes into this environment that is difficult to navigate with 20 bosses plus. And I think that's what this whole thing has come down to, is I don't understand the criteria she's putting forward to get to the end. And I want it simple, because I'm a simple guy. I don't know, I don't know if you can do, I don't know if that can be done. Does that make sense?
I think that's the
She
challenge.
has to compromise.
I think that's
In
the
other words,
challenge.
I'm asking you to compromise. That's like me. I built houses. You want me to lower my standards? So I
really don't know where to go.
Well, I would suggest that this get looked at again, incorporating, because it's apparent that not all, but probably most of the supervisors in the situation with the county administrator would appreciate a chance to be heard at some point in the process. So if we go forward with this, maybe in a more simplified form, that it also includes a wrap session with Paul, closed to the press, because they don't want to hear about my parking space problem.
They left already.
yeah, they left right after that.
You didn't last long at all.
No.
Oh, by the way, I voted for your pay raise. But I think it's as a charge in going forward, I would like to see this a lot simpler, and I would like to see more input from supervisors encouraged, not just, oh, you can write a letter kind of thing. I also think that if we're evaluating Paul and planning to do that for some time in the future, it almost looks to me like this and what you were saying is kind of a job description type of thing that we would need with a new administrator or potential new administrators. But all this stuff at this point in time is probably not necessary to the evaluation of a person who's been in this position for a number of years and seems to know what they're doing and what their job is.
All right, so what you're saying is that you're asking that we ask Gretchen to go back again to simplify the form. I went through the form incidentally, and I thought it was pretty simple, but...
Well, we're talking about different forms too. I mean, this is the evaluation form, which is, you know, it's still a lot bigger than what I thought we were going to look at. And then you've got the other criteria here that is really quite extensive. I don't know, I'm kind of in Dan's position in that HR is not my my area of expertise by any means. However, there are a lot of people that watch that videotape and can correctly tell that coach that he did something wrong, whether you're just a JV coach or not, so, or that something needs to improve. So, and that, again, that's a, you know, you're dealing with a political entity, that is allowed to happen and should be allowed to happen.
And I heard what Paul said, and I think that you made a lot of really good points with that. I think it is worth the time to go back to the drawing board and not to give up, because it isn't a waste of time by any stretch of the imagination. And while we aren't experts in HR, we should, not that we're experts in our jobs as supervisors, but we should be fairly well invested in what we're doing here and what we expect from our county administrator and our county as a whole, including our chairman and the committees that we sit on. So I think we come to the table with a very different type of expertise than our HR department. So when we came together a few meetings ago and did some research and looked at some other simple forms and said, hey, this is what we want as supervisors on a form, I think we need to go back to the drawing board. And then you've always said, Bud, you don't care what kind of form it goes in, just so long as we, you know, we're at the table and we're making this move. Why can't we go back to the drawing board and look at those elements that we agreed we liked?
Rest of the committee? We're getting no place fast here. I think what I'm hearing from the group, and correct me if I'm wrong, you like the idea of an executive session prior to starting the evaluation process. Is that correct?
Or as part of it.
As part of it.
Preliminary part of
Okay.
it.
All right. Do you agree, Dan?
Yeah,
And obviously you do, Gracia.
and to be honest with you, I don't, this is, the form, it doesn't bother me so much, but I don't think I get enough out of it. I don't think, okay, so I guess my point is, the form to me, it's different, I guess, for these two, but simplify it the way it is, it's okay, but needs other elements. I think if we're gonna move forward, Ron and Rachel have to get a little closer to what they envisioned and the form. That's what I'm seeing.
Yeah, I'm not sure what we're suggesting now. That's why I'm having so much trouble trying to go forward. And I'm trying to root that out now by saying we all agree that we should have, as part of the process, we should have an executive session to discuss the performance of the administrator.
It's structured in some way previously. You know, you're gonna solicit input from your supervisors before that executive session in terms of questions, and, you know, I don't think it's productive to go into executive session and say, what do you think, Paul? How do you think you're doing? I think there has to be some of these questions that are gonna be discussed in open air.
I don't agree with you. This is a pretty big deal. If you're doing a review of your administrator, you're gonna do it once a year.
Right?
I don't think it's gonna come as a surprise to the supervisor. I think they're gonna have plenty of questions and plenty of comments.
So just let supervisors know throughout the year, you know, make your comments and come to the table with questions you wanna ask,
Sure.
are gonna be asked by the chairman of the board.
We don't wanna structure we'll make a structure about what you're gonna ask.
Okay.
All right. So, Greg.
You gotta have the structure with the see, I like the goals thing, because this is a big, operation here, and it's a diverse, you know, it's not like we're just making pencils over here, that's how you do it. This is, you know, it's all over the place. And so I like the goals part because it keeps the focus, or attempts to.
I agree.
And, you know, without the board being focused, you know, I see it as two different things, all right, the evaluation form, but then you gotta have the goals too, and you gotta be able to measure it to those goals that you expect, or else your evaluation really doesn't, then it gets, you know, I don't know, personal like this.
That's it. Okay, so, part of the process would be the executive session with the administrator. And now we're getting back to this form thing again. And as far as I'm concerned, these forms are just fine. I don't think they're difficult to work with. I think that they're fairly easy to fill out. But we're hung up now on what the form is gonna be, and I've made the suggestion before. It doesn't, if we approve this form, it doesn't mean we can't go back and make a change and grow into it. But I think what we're saying now is you wanna see all these changes made, and you want this thing to be perfect before we start.
Okay.
Well, also, at the initial discussion today, when we were talking about who uses this form, and whether it would be appropriate for every supervisor to use this form or not, if every supervisor gets their opportunity for a face-to-face discussion, it may not be necessary for every supervisor to have this form to fill out. And if this form is only gonna be used by the executive committee or the personnel committee or whoever gets the lucky, job, I think I can live with that, although I prefer the shorter version. I mean, this doesn't exactly line up with this, but I don't wanna sit here hung up on this. I don't know. It's gonna be, we're gonna do something and it's gonna be right or wrong for any number of supervisors.
Jim?
I think what Gene said was pretty good. Why don't we do like a trial run? Is that what you were sort of saying? So try it, see if it works, and then see what the bugs are, and then, you know.
I would like to see.
It would be.
You answer those questions, and you might get an idea of how everybody's thinking, and then we can go back. And
Right, then we're not debating stuff, we're, got something to work with.
I mean, there could be 10 problems with DPW. Maybe, you know, we can come down, you know, it's tough for the administrators to know every department too. I mean, it's tough. If you're thinking about it, it's tough.
The only thing Paul might have to go through a trial run where
We'll make them run a gauntlet.
right. I mean,
Gene,
it'd be up to you too, I think.
Are you talking about this Exhibit B?
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, big. You know, it's simple, you know, just X's and, you know, maybe we'll learn something, what everybody's thinking.
I don't have any problem with doing that, but I'm not sure that's gonna get us off the dime, and we'll get right back into the discussion we're having now. But
I think I'm having a little bit of a problem with this first form, that, to me, it kind of feels like words not being put in my mouth or the committee's mouth, but this, I need more time to really look at it. When I look at this and I say, if the chairman desires, they may, and this is something we'd be recommending to the whole board, may include the entire board of supervisors in process by soliciting their input. I think what we're saying is this committee is saying, as part of this evaluation, we want the supervisors' input. It's not up to the chairman to say, hey, will everybody, so we're making a recommendation that we want everybody's input, whether that be in an executive session, or after, or before, in the form, verbally. I just don't think it's clear enough at this point to be able to make a resolution and put anything in front of personnel or the board, because we really can't figure out what we want by that. And that's why, as our county administrator, he seems to have really you gave a great kind of synopsis of everything you're hearing here today, looking at it objectively. Why not look at it objectively, work with HR, work with us as a committee, you know, and let's take round 3.
What if the executive committee met and did an official evaluation, and then the board did theirs, and then see how the two match, and then say, well, and everybody understands that this is a trial run, doesn't necessarily reflect an evaluation of how, but just to see what questions worked, what questions didn't work, was it too, and just sort of have a trial run to see and work out the kinks that way, rather than arguing over what works. I mean, we're never gonna get anywhere with just talking. Does that make sense, or no?
it
Or something like that.
It doesn't make sense to me to have the individual supervisors respond to this form. I don't see what it buys us. They'll all turn this back in, but when we start talking about it, we're gonna be right back where we are today.
I don't know, thought I kind of disagree. I think if Paul went back to the table and took a round 3, I mean, you started with the committee meetings and saying that you think this was a worthwhile effort, that it's worth when,
It is.
and granted, no hard feelings here. You can throw out my form after you asked me to do it. That's okay. You said, when Ron said, so what Rachel did was a waste of time. Your response to that was, no, not a waste of time. We're coming up with a better product.
That's what I
Why
thought we
is
were
that
doing.
any different than saying, Gretchen, not a waste of time, priority of the board. Let's come up with a better product that reflects what the supervisors are thinking, not what HR is thinking.
Okay, so what are you saying? Are you saying?
Let's go to round 3.
All right, what's round 3?
Well, Paul suggested.
What did Paul suggest?
I guess maybe to make it easy on everybody, I think that what I'm suggesting is that, we go back. Gretchen had both a process and she had forms. We go back, simplify both, and include in that process, if you will, this executive session, because one of the things that struck me when I heard Supervisor Gerard speaking, and we all know this is true, the nature of our business is to talk, to communicate, and you guys are obviously good at it or you wouldn't be in the positions that you're in. So I think that's the vehicle by which we best get the job done, is if we can communicate without putting things in writing necessarily. I mean, there'd be time for a written approach, and that should be part of it. But I think that what I was hearing from Supervisor Gerard, and then when I think about the nature of our business, it would be very, very healthy to have this communication in an executive session with a body, and we need to decide perhaps what the body is, whether it's the committee, the board, however you guys want to do that. I think you can do it, either way. But that, I think, is an important aspect of it. So what I would think is that I would brainstorm this with Gretchen to say, okay, listening to everything what we heard, we know that has to be a piece of it. We know we need to simplify the forms. We know we need to make the process easier. I think we can do it, and I guess call it round 3. I think, though, personally, I think we can get there.
We have attempt that, and we'll call a meeting, and
I mean, the only thing I would suggest is, after you meet with Gretchen, you go through whatever, if we could just get whatever, say a week ahead of time, let's forget the February date. So what? It takes us longer. Big deal. It means we're working harder at it. So we push out the date of whatever next meeting. That gives us ample time, a week or two, to say, all right, let me look at this, because here it says it is expected the learning curve at the executive level will be 2 years. I don't know, do I agree or disagree with that? And how do I feel? I want to talk to my colleagues. I want to look at other counties. I want to talk to NISAC. I want to come up with an informed and educated response to whatever draft. I can't do that in 2 days. I don't think anyone expects us to.
Right.
So let's take round 3. Let's really piece it apart. You come up with that recommendation. You send it out to us, and then let's figure out a reasonable time, because I know we're coming up on spring breaks here. Some of us are going to be out of town. March might be a difficult month to try to pull this off. But doesn't mean we can't do it outside of sitting here together for 2 hours, and while I love it, we could do some stuff outside of sitting here, and
Right.
this is productive. It's important. Never would I say anything we're asked to do here is a waste of time, even the first draft at trying this. I agree with you. I don't think it's a waste of time.
No, we could definitely, plan it so that you have at least a week, if not more, to look at what the next draft documents are, and that would be, I think, good.
Okay, why don't we plan then, and not schedule a meeting now? We'll wait until Gretchen and Paul have worked on this, and we'll meet again whenever the date is. I don't know.
We'll make it a priority, definitely, get it done.
All right, anything else?
motion adjourned.
Second.
Thank you, I got a motion finally.
You got a motion before.
Courtesy.